He fired the entire engineering team, dismissing 3 years of genius with a single, condescending nod. But what happens when the creators decide to reclaim their masterpiece? This is the story of Nexus, and the quiet, devastating revenge we exacted. It started, as these things always do, with a feeling of quiet certainty. A sense that we were not just building something good. We were building something inevitable. We were building Nexus. I was the lead architect on the core engine, but the engine was us. It was the 12 of us, the dreamers, the grinders. The ones who saw the elegant solution when the market saw a tangled mess of legacy code. We were a tight unit, bound by coffee fumes, shared panic during integration hell. And the sheer, intoxicating thrill of making something work perfectly. We weren't just employees at Nova Tech, we were the engine room. The beating heart of the entire operation. And Mark, our CEO, well, Mark was the gleaming, slightly too loud facade bolted onto the front of the machine. Occasionally throwing in a motivational platitude that felt utterly divorced from the reality of writing complex, asynchronous callbacks at 3 a.m. We had been chipping away at Nexus for 3 years. 3 years of late nights, blurring into early mornings. Of debugging cryptic errors that seemed designed purely to spite human intelligence. Of rewriting modules because Mark, in a moment of sudden, dazzling inspiration, or perhaps sheer impatience, decided the current approach was too beige. We had poured our sweat, our weekends, our very identities into that codebase. It wasn't just efficient, it was beautiful. It was lean, robust, and utterly revolutionary in the crowded field of enterprise software. It was, quite simply, our masterpiece. And because it was ours, it felt sacred. But sacred things in a corporate environment are usually just things, waiting to be exploited. Mark had a talent for appropriation. He didn't just credit us, he subsumed us. When the Series B funding hit, he didn't thank the team. He praised the synergy of the Novatech visionary collective. When the initial press release landed, highlighting Nexus as the next-generation paradigm shift, every sentence was a carefully manicured nod to his genius. With us listed in a footnote so small, we almost pretended we were just interns. The subtle digs began to escalate into open assaults. We would present a complex performance optimization, something that shaved a measurable 18% off processing time. And Mark would nod slowly, stroke his chin, and then declare, yes, a clever tweak, but the real genius, team, is realizing that such optimization is merely a necessary byproduct of the core philosophy. That I established. We started calling him the Oracle of Unearned Insight. The worst was the feature pipeline. We were deep into integrating the quantum layer, a module we had spent 6 months perfecting, handling predictive scaling with almost supernatural grace. When Mark decided we needed to pivot, he called an emergency meeting. His energy radiating the kind of manufactured urgency only a man terrified of appearing stagnant can generate. "It's too technical," he announced, tapping the massive presentation screen where our flawless UI mockups shone. "If the client, the big one, the one who matters, they need something simpler, more approachable. We need to dial back the elegance and dial up the friendly." We looked at him, bewildered. "But Mark, the quantum layer is the approachability. It handles the complexity, so the user doesn't have to see it. It's invisible intelligence." He waved a dismissive hand. A gesture that felt less like delegation and more like swatting a particularly smart fly. "Nonsense, it's too much math. We need a simple drag-and-drop visualization widget. Take the quantum layer, strip it down, make it cute, and slap it onto the front end. Don't touch the core logic, just simplify the presentation." The implication hung heavy in the air, thick as stale office air conditioning. He wasn't just asking us to do grunt work. He was telling us that the monumental effort, the intellectual peak we had reached, was merely a complicated foundation upon which his simple, marketable idea could be built. He wanted us to be high-end contractors, not the architects. We argued for an hour. We showed him benchmark charts proving that simplification would sacrifice 4% efficiency, which in their model meant millions in lost potential revenue. We appealed to his ego, gently reminding him that the philosophy he established was entirely dependent on the code we wrote. But Mark, impervious to logic when it challenged his narrative, simply smiled. That infuriating, self-satisfied smile. Gentlemen, ladies, you are too focused on the how. I'm focused on the why, and the why is money. So, let's make it cute. Get to it. That was the breaking point. It wasn't the drag-and-drop widget, it was the casual, absolute dismissal of our collective competence. It was the implication that our genius was merely a highly polished tool waiting for his hands to wield it. The firing came 3 weeks later. Under the guise of restructuring for agile alignment, we were gathered in the main conference room. The mood still slightly bruised from the widget debacle. Mark stood at the head of the table, looking smug, holding a single, pristine document. Team, he began, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. As we move into this exciting new phase of streamlining, we need to optimize our personnel structure. Frankly, we have too much intellectual weight in one room. We need agility. Therefore, effective immediately, the core development team, the architects of Nexus, will be transitioning to a specialized, leaner unit. Congratulations, everyone. You are now consultants on a contract basis. You will be paid adequately. Adequately. After 3 years of giving him the world, he was offering us a slightly above-average salary and a handshake that felt suspiciously like a bribe. The silence that followed was so profound. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system, the faint whir of the projector fan, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. For a moment, I felt the familiar surge of the hot, useless anger. The urge to yell, to smash the expensive water carafe, to publicly dismantle his entire self-conception in the span of 30 seconds. But then, the rage settled. It didn't explode, it compressed. It became dense, heavy, and perfectly focused. Consultants, one of the younger developers muttered, his voice flat with disbelief. Mark beamed, clearly expecting applause. Yes. We value your expertise, of course. But we need to bring in some fresh blood with a more modern, less entrenched mindset. Fresh blood. He wanted to replace the proven, brilliant, exhausted, deeply loyal engine room crew with some eager, slightly naive interns who could be molded to serve his narrative. That was when the quiet calculation began. The anger shifted from a volatile emotion into a weapon. We had the code. We owned the code. Even though the legal paperwork was written in legalese designed to make us feel subservient. The Nexus engine was not just proprietary, it was ours. And if he wanted to own it, if he wanted to claim authorship over the very architecture of our success, then we were going to give him a taste of true ownership. A taste so overwhelming, so undeniable, that he wouldn't just own it. He would be forced to host it, maintain it, and market it under the shadow of our collective brilliance. Mark, I said, my voice cutting through his satisfied monologue. It was low, steady, and completely devoid of tremor. Before we discuss consulting rates, perhaps you'd like to review the core repository one last time. He blinked, momentarily thrown off his rhythm. Review it. Why? It's been thoroughly vetted. It has, I agreed, standing up slowly, letting the gravity of the moment settle. But I think, given the transition to a leaner unit and the need for modern mindset, complete transparency across the board would be beneficial. We want the new blood to understand the magnificent beast they are inheriting. He hesitated, a flicker of genuine unease crossing his face. Transparency was good for the brand, it was good for the narrative. It allowed him to point to the code and say, "See, it's perfect, my perfect." "Go ahead," he prompted, already tapping his tablet. "Let's see the quantum optimizations." And then I made the executive decision of our 12-person vengeance committee. I nodded to the lead engineer next to me, and together we executed the command. The screen behind Mark didn't just display the code, it exploded into it. Lines of optimized C++, perfectly structured Python scripts. The elegant mathematical proofs woven into the data handling layers. It was a river of genius cascading across the presentation wall. "This," I stated, allowing the silent awe of the room to wash over us, "is the Nexus engine. This is the culmination of 3 years of relentless effort. This is the architecture that makes your simple drag-and-drop widget not just cute, but potentially world-changing." Mark stared at it, his practiced smugness momentarily fractured by genuine professional respect. He started to open his mouth, probably to launch into a speech about how he guided the vision. But before the words could form, I pressed another key. The screen shifted again, and a single, massive banner overlaid the code, "Open Source." We watched Mark's face change. The slight annoyance, the defensiveness, the entitlement, it all drained away, leaving a pale, stunned mask. "Open Source." He finally managed, the word sounding foreign and slightly accusatory. "Yes," I confirmed. "We've just pushed the entire, fully functional, production-ready codebase to GitHub. It is now freely available to the world, Mark. Anyone can fork it. Anyone can improve it. Anyone can build something magnificent on top of it. And because you are so keen on establishing the original visionary narrative, you can claim the initial IP, the seed, as you wish." The room erupted. A small cheer broke out, quickly swelling into a wave of genuine, excited applause. We hadn't just handed him the keys, we had handed him the entire factory. The blueprints, the workforce, and the patents to the raw materials. Mark, finally finding his footing, sputtered, "But the moat, the exclusivity, the leverage. What about the revenue stream?" "The revenue stream," I countered smoothly, leaning forward slightly, meeting his gaze directly, "is now democratized. You can charge premium for the Novatech branding wrapper, Mark. You can charge exorbitant fees for certified enterprise support. You can even charge people just to look at the beautiful code if you like. But the core, the undeniable, brilliant, beautiful Nexus engine, it is free. It belongs to everyone." The true revenge wasn't the code itself. It was the permission we revoked. We took the ultimate power, the power to define value, and we placed it back into the hands of the community. The people who actually understood the depth of what we had created. We stripped him of his proprietary control. The fallout was immediate and glorious. Within the hour, the news feeds were ablaze. Tech blogs went into overdrive. Investors who had been nervously eyeing the bottleneck of proprietary control suddenly saw a massive opportunity for ecosystem growth. The stock dipped slightly, the initial shock of the loss of absolute monopoly. But then it stabilized, and then it began to climb. The world wasn't outraged that he had lost control. The world was excited that he had been forced to share. Mark spent the next 48 hours in a state of existential crisis. He was forced to shift from being the sole genius to being the chief evangelist of other people's genius. He had to start tweeting about community collaboration and the power of open ecosystems. Concepts he had previously treated with utter contempt. When he finally came to the main office on day 3, looking haggard and defeated, the atmosphere was different. The nervous energy of the impending firing was replaced by a vibrant, buzzing sense of collective power. We weren't consultants, we were the stewards. He walked up to me, his usual swagger slightly diminished. His shoulders curved inward like a man who had just been told. His throne was rented. You didn't just open source it, he whispered, running a hand over the sleek conference table. You released it into the wild. You made it unstoppable. I looked him dead in the eye. And the simmering rage finally found a perfect, satisfying outlet. It wasn't to shout. It was a quiet pronouncement, the final word in our long, glorious rebellion. And no, Mark, I corrected him gently. We didn't just open source it. We made it ours again. And now, everyone else owns a piece of it too. You can keep your fancy title. But you can no longer pretend you are the only architect in the room.